Welcome back to another episode of Paradigm Shift TV 314. Man, say, we got a good one for y'all today. We got the Slim Reaper, Leondre, in the building. We also got the political plug, Domo, in the building. Just based off of those two names, y'all should already know that it's gonna be a good one for y'all today, man. Today, we're gonna be talking about politics. And while we talk about these politics of today, these two brothers, give me 1 second, sir. I apologize for that. Okay. We're going to be talking about the politics of black folks. We have black conservatism versus black liberalism. And we have 6 questions for both of the brothers to give their point of view about. And we're just going to jump right on into this show. Well, first off, I want to let Leondre introduce yourself to the audience, let them know which side of the fence that you're going to be on. And then after that, we're going to let Domo go and let the people know which side of the fence that he's on.
Well, usually I will let my superior go first as Brother Domo, but since Brother Nobody said that I can go first, I'll go first. But so I'm Leondre McBride. Really nobody important, even though it says someone really important right there. But so I'm representing the black conservative side. So that's where I am, Brother Domo.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little special. You know what I'm saying? I do certain things. I am Domo, the political plug. Y'all can find me on Instagram, TikTok at the political plug. Check out my podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, at the Chop Up Show, where we have this type of dialogue. But don't let Leondre fool you. That's a smart nigga. You know what I mean? So I'm definitely on my P's and Q's. I do want to make a clarification. I am a black leftist. I'm not a black liberal. I'm a black leftist. It's certain things that liberals and leftists agree on, and we probably agree more than we agree with conservatives. But you know what I'm saying? I ain't got no problem defending the liberal side. But me, myself, I'm a black leftist, just to be clear.
Okay.
And we can talk about what those distinctions mean as we get into the conversation.
Okay, I apologize for making that mistake, my bros. But if y'all ready,
you good.
Let's jump right into this thing, man. We're finna go with question number 1. And everybody, just to know, this is not a debate. This is a discussion. Both brothers are going to be going back and forward. They're going to have about 20 minutes each round, but we may go over because, these brothers have very good information. So question 1, my brothers, it says, describe your political ideology and how it interacts with the current political dichotomy.
I guess since Leondre introduced himself first, I'll start off. That's actually a good place for us to start, because like as I was saying, I'm more of a black leftist. Like I said, I agree with certain liberal aspects, but what I mean by that is like my politics are situated around viewing the perspective of how government functions as a way to maximize the rights of people. I advocate for forms of government that are progressive, that allow for different ways of thought, different spiritual beliefs, and human rights in pretty much every capacity. So whether it's the LGBTQ issue, whether it's the issue of poverty and capitalism, whether it's the issue of other things we're gonna talk about, like abortion, I'm always on the side of maximizing the rights of people, for all people, regardless of where we disagree and where the difference may lie. And when I say I'm a black leftist, that means that, again, because I would argue that when we put black in front of these terms, it shifts what they mean, because it shifts how we interact with them. And so when we talk about progressivism, the reason why I would describe it as black progressivism is because it makes sure to deal with the reality of race, the impact that race has on me as a person, and how it defines what's important to me politically. You feel me? So it's not that like my relationship to human rights isn't just because we're all humans and we all need to get along. I take the standpoint I have on human rights because as black people in this country, and as a descendant of an enslaved African, of a colonial in the colonization of Africa, we as a people had to endure the worst of of greed. You know what I'm saying? The worst that some of the world had to offer. And because of that, I'm always going to be against people having to experience what it was that anything similar to what my ancestors are enduring and that people deal with today. You feel me? So that's how I would characterize Black, like the Black leftist position. You feel me? Equity for Black people, maximizing the human rights for people, and then I add what I put in there for myself is just autonomy for Black people to be able to be Black in the ways that we want to be Black and not defined by anything in particular.
Yeah. So for me, I represent the Black conservative position. And when I say Black conservative, I guess what I would give a nod to many of the Black folks of the past who had more conservative ideologies, and where I think that's sort of common among the Black experience, where they're at least socially conservative, even if they don't recognize that they might have lots of similarities with political conservatism. But in the respect that I believe that there are some absolute truths that I adhere to. Natural law theory means that I can hold to consistent theories and notions of justice, rightness, wrongness of particular actions. I think that gives me a particular framework to evaluating issues of the past, present, and even making future forecasts about the rightness or wrongness of particular actions, because I hold to particular absolutes. I think that the conservative approach can be seen today in many areas where Domo and I, some of the stuff that Brother Domo and I were going to get into, as it relates to things like whether it be religion, abortion, affirmative action, that sort of thing, where there are certain particular absolute truths that govern how we should view these things, and they sort of limit the available answers to particular questions. Basically, one of the things that that conservatism as a whole gives a nod to is that power for us is a zero-sum game, and giving power to any particular group of people, whether it be government or the people themselves, means that it necessitates that power is pulled from some other place. And so the conservative approach generally sort of believes that majority power, that it's some of the stuff like Domo, where the government is supposed to act in such a way that maximizes certain rights. But the conservative approach likewise states that, and I think rightfully, that giving the government power in certain areas means that it diminishes rights in other particular areas. And so I have a sort of Platonic and Aristotelian view of power in that respect, and I typically view I typically think that that what happens is that communities have particular values that ought to be built up, and that those things are useful for building up an entire community. And so need to be good, objective values applied to particular communities in order to churn out good citizens. And many of these things are objective. And so you can see a lot of conservatism, I think, of today when people try to do things like define man and woman, and wanting to use an objective standard for doing so. And so the conservative approach would say that there's a such thing as a man and a woman. These are meaningful distinctions, not ones that you can sort of go fluid in between these sorts of things. So that's, I guess, how it relates to the current political dichotomy. And so I think that you can see those two opposing views, what I would call a more progressive view of even things like race, gender, and that sort of stuff, where these have a more concrete foundation that's more absolute. Hopefully, I answered the question.
No, I guess the only thing that I would add is that I guess the way that where I would fall on like when I say the political dichotomy, it's like the liberal conservative like framework. I would fall more on the liberal side. I do end up more so supporting more liberal politicians. I try to go. I prefer my politicians on the left, But I think one thing that I think is funny is that the politicians that get called the extreme left politicians are far from it. Like they don't like Joe Biden is not a part of like any extreme progressive nothing. You feel me? Like so, but you know, what I mean, he could play the part. So,
the screen froze up on us, bro.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. My camera look good on my end. I don't know what's going on the
well, I think that's Brother Nobody's Metro internet again, because Brother Domo, you were clear the whole way for me. So.
Okay, my bad. Go ahead, Domo. I apologize.
Okay. All right, cool. But yeah, so just in terms of like where like how I interact, I'm wholly opposed of the Democrat versus Republican paradigm, but I would argue that the Democratic side, the progressive side, is more beneficial for things that Black people care about and deal with. So I would say I'm not a Democrat, but I don't run from Democrat smoke. I say that.
Yeah. So, and I guess so with the current political dichotomy, obviously, I think, and Domo, I think you would agree with this, that that what you've had as of late, whereas like with persons like and we talked about this on another occasion, you and I, Domo, but JFK would have been more at that stage would have been more of a conservative Democrat, whereas Bush would have been classified, according to textbook, as a more liberal Republican. And since then, we've seen the sort of distinctions grow, where more liberal folks align with the Democratic Party, and more conservative folks align with the Republican Party. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yes.
That's how we lean. Yeah.
Yes. So I guess so. I don't know, and maybe you can help with here, because I know you talked about that the liberal side sort of aligns more with what sort of Black folk care about, things like that. So I guess just on that note, as far as like one of the things that's been so what was it? It was the 2016 the no it was with it was with the 2016 elections, right? So when you got Trump running, and you got the whole slew of Democrats running, right? And this is a particular issue that the Democratic Party particularly aligns with. And I know, and what I guess I would guess is that you'd probably align with this as well, because sort of what you talked about with not wanting certain other groups of people to experience what the sort of Black experience was, on your view. As it relates to the issue of immigration. So when I watched the debates, right, the Democratic primary debates.
That's one of the questions I forgot. I knew it was one more issue that I wanted to put into a question, but I'm glad you're bringing it up now. But go ahead.
Listen, I watched as almost every single particular candidate got up there, and I mean like pretty much everybody except for Sanders got up there. Cory Booker and like you name it, everybody got up there and started speaking in Spanish. And so for me, I see a particular rub between these two people groups, Negroes in America and with southern border crossers from Mexico. And it's one of the particular points that liberal Democrats, which I think is most of them, make a point to try to get Black folk to identify with. I see a rub there. What's your particular view on that? And can you tell me sort of how this, what this interplay is between issues of immigration, illegal immigration specifically across the southern border from Mexico and Central and South America, and how this sort of thing would interest Black folks, and why this should be, if you share that view, and if not, I guess you can reject or deny it. But I guess I'm assuming that you would. But if not, just correct me if I'm wrong. But speak to that for me.
So that's a good question, because I think what ends up happening is it has become more of a conversation for Black folk, but the problem is it's more of immigration kind of represents a new antagonism in Black communities. But what I would argue though is that antagonism is misplaced, or us viewing it as an antagonism is misplaced. So like the way I don't think that the issue of immigration, I don't think is like a Black issue or really an issue that Black people should feel like, whether demanding open borders or whatever. I think it's one of those things where white corporate, or I ain't gonna say white corporations, because corporations are corporations, but corporations in general have created this incentive for the for work for immigrant communities, because there's certain work that we as black people, and whether you want to say it's because we entitled Americans or whatever, we're not gonna do that work. We're not gonna do them jobs. And then the white people that we live in the same communities with, they not gonna do them jobs. But it's people that's willing to pay individuals who haven't made or who came over here illegally to do that work. And we become so dependent on it that you see in places like Florida, when Ron DeSantis passes his legislation, that Florida starts hemorrhaging money. Projects aren't getting done, and it's because they rely on the labor of illegal immigrants in order for it to be a thing. And so I think that there are people who have, I mean, because to be honest, they took our jobs like kind of contention again is I would just argue with xenophobia, because Leondre, you and I, we both know niggas that's not gonna go pick strawberries for $25 a day. Like that's not happening, right? But we will go to the market and buy them same strawberries that was picked by somebody that's being considered illegal. So I think that immigration has turned into just another political talking point that is used to strike fear in people. And unfortunately, it's something like what's going on with Chicago specifically. We starting to see that again, the government's taking a heavy-handed approach with immigration, and it's causing conflict with the community. And they're really not doing anything to kind of deal with the fears that people are adopting. So I guess a quick or short way to answer it is I don't think it's an issue that black voters like really care about, but the black voters that do are adopting some of the xenophobic fears that you get from country white people when it comes to immigration.
Yes. So for me, I think that black folk have to be immensely concerned with issues of immigration and how this affects our particular communities. I remember years ago, I posted on my Facebook page a paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the economists there, they made reference to a 2007 Wall Street Journal article that basically highlighted the fact that on Labor Day of all days, there was a raid on a plant in somewhere in Georgia. I can't remember. It's like somewhat an S. It's like, I don't know. It's like Stillwater or something. I don't know my Georgia geography, but it was somewhere in Georgia, and like 75% of the workers there were illegal immigrants, and they were rounded up and shipped off to detention facilities. And what happened as a result of that is that there was an immediate opening for the 75% of the workers and stuff there. That niggas came in, and what the company had to do, well, watch this. And one of the things that you highlighted, Domo, and what I would push back on one of the points you made, I actually think that we'll be willing to do the work. I think that we'll be willing to do the work, though, for more pay. And I think when it comes to a lot of agricultural jobs and things like that, one of the things that one of the scholars that already talked about, like you have like a small portion of, like it's a very small segment of the actual cost for farm and produce and that sort of thing. A very small cost of that is a labor cost. So it might raise like the wages like 5%. It might raise the cost for the company as a whole, like the labor cost 5%, as far as the bottom line for what the end user price pays or whatever, right? So I think that like that's a particular one that I think black folk need to be paying attention to, because and one of the things that the paper highlighted on NBER was the fact that you have that niggas, black folks in the community, right? Like the ones who are in the inner city communities end up experiencing higher levels of incarceration that they experience because they're sitting idle, that they experience lower levels of education because the more of these folks who have intended to come here and the more who are coming here because they know there's jobs. Now, and I think that in Domo, and you might make the point, and others have, I wrote a paper about it, like, you know, in school, we really disrupted the economy of Mexico and like Central and South America with NAFTA and other North American trade agreements. But that being said, it still affects the Negro in the community who has to go apply for low-skilled labor, because while they may not compete with the jobs that white folk have to do up at the top, right? They may not be doctors, lawyers, that sort of thing like that, but they are competing for low-skilled labor. And so like with the factory in Georgia over there, the company immediately, because they saw an immediate shortage and people were afraid to come apply because they were legal immigrants, they actually saw the wages increase at that one particular factory by $1 to $2 an hour. And then you had an influx of people applying because they were willing to work for this amount, just not the amount they're willing to pay the illegal immigrant who wasn't going to ruffle any feathers. And so I think like as an economic whole for Black folk, one, you know, just with like the ability to, I don't know what happened to the brother, but with the ability to feed your particular family, you are in direct competition with what progressives and leftists and liberals are pushing for your community, because you actually have to compete. When your schools are underperforming in all of these areas, or you wonder why they're taking away woodshop programs and auto mechanics programs and construction programs, you need to look to how much they're actually funding English second language programs. And so for me, I see a direct competition here for Negroes in the inner city where we live in close proximity to these people. Housing becomes an issue, right? And housing is a major issue. It's a major political talking point. And so for my people, what I want them is to have, because we didn't even ask to come here, we were brought here against our will. I want us to have first crack at these things. You made me be here. Language, identity, culture, all the stuff like that, all that was taken in order for you to get some free labor. And so you actually owe me here, this thing over here. And so you don't get to take, and for this other person over here, who you didn't do as much stuff to, I'm sorry, you owe me a little bit more here. So I personally feel like that's an area where Black folk need to be concerned, and you would want to take the more conservative approach, the one that more Republicans are taking, against the illegal immigration, against the millions of border crossings that happen annually, because they are not competing for white people jobs. And when you see most of those statistics where they highlight that, you know, that they're not stealing by and large American jobs, and in most of those jobs they're looking at like white people jobs, Asian jobs, STEM fields, that kind of stuff. Obviously, a low education, low skilled worker from down here is not going to be taking their job, but they are going to compete for your job. When your people need to develop skills at a fast food restaurant, I'm talking to try to stall time. I've
been listening though, so you good. So
yeah. I was trying to stall time to get back in, but yeah. So I do think though that they are going to compete with us, and I think that research bears that out. And so I think that like that's an area where liberalism and progressivism and leftism has failed the Black community, where you import their direct competition for schools, for housing in the inner cities and inner communities, and education, and work and all this stuff. So I think that like leftism, liberalism, and progressives, I think that they fail the Black American, and I think that they entice us to pick this as our fight, when in reality what they're importing is people who are going to compete with me, my cousin, you know, Pookie, Ray, Nam, stuff like over in the community, when they want the fast food job and they've hired Maria and Rosalinda and Juan. But go ahead, Brother Domo.
No, yeah, I feel like that's what a clash is on this question of the competing for resources, because you can't take a group that's already like Black communities, for example, that's already underinvested and underfunded, and then say, well, we bringing in more people to these underinvested and underfunded areas, and then y'all got to compete for the scraps. And the people that and we're arguing that, well, the people that they bringing in is the problem, because I think what ends up happening is it's where this is where capitalism kind of creates these. Well, actually, this is what I typically argue is this is where capitalism and race like work hand in hand to create these like kind of like these hierarchies like amongst the proletariat, or hierarchies amongst like the have-nots already. And so like when I'm asking when you ask poor white people, or if I was to ask who do poor white people have more in common with, rich white people or poor Black people, most people would assume that they got more in common with. There are people who would assume that they have more in common with rich white people because they're also white, when the lived experience of poverty is more of a relation to a whole bunch of white people than a whole bunch of Black people. But our issue our issue as an impoverished people, as a people that lack resources, like white people look at poor black people as a problem. Like y'all are the reason why, and y'all are getting in the way of, and y'all are messing up our, you know what I'm saying, our community. Even though you look at the company that this white man that works for, he's being underpaid. They fucking him on this pension. You feel me? Like they fucking him on. They got crazy vacation policies, being treated like shit by the company. But the issue that they have is with the black people that work for the company, or the black people in the community. And that and I think that's what happens when we then, as black people, look at a alien or an immigrant population and then say, well, you're my competition, and it's already not a lot. Our issue should be with the fact that it's already not a lot. Like, because I believe that there should be investment and resources for people who come over here to take advantage of the opportunities that we claim to be about and that we claim to have. We're the best and the greatest nation in the world. We have all the best people. You feel me? We have all these great things, and we've been like literally the whole the mantra has been about, you know, creating opportunity for more people, and or people coming to America to take advantage of the opportunity that's here. And then all of us, but now that we're in this more in like a for real, because I don't even want to call it a melting pot, because I will argue that we still hella segregated. But it's all of these different communities that are represented now in America. And then even people who represent ethnic communities is turning around and saying like, but I got a problem with immigration. That don't like to me that problem. If it was centered around, like, say, all right, they coming over here being violent, and and that kind of bore itself out, right? That's a xenophobic fear. That's more so situated in a pathology created around immigrant populations, as opposed to the reality of how those people operate. Then there's this conversation, but then it goes to whether it's this economic situation, and that's coming from the same xenophobic fear. Our issue should be about getting resources for black people and making sure other impoverished populations actually also get resources. You feel me? And again, you know, that sounds like, I know for conservatism, that sounds like a utopia. You feel me? That like many people get resources.
You already know the word I was going to say. Because you already know the word I was going to say. Go ahead, Domo, because I was going to say the exact word, but go ahead. I'm asking anyway, but go ahead, bro.
No, yeah, I know, because it sounds like wait, what? Like everybody getting resources? Yes, you feel me? Because we can't say that or we can't look at our economic situation and see how like money and resources and opportunity is so top heavy, and the people at the bottom really don't get access to as much, right? I mean, because like I'm sure you know, like where you're born, like the area that you're born in plays the largest role of, you know, how you end up in the future and the opportunities that most people end up with. And so it's like, if the issue is that, well, black people already don't have a lot and it's more people coming into the places that we are, then we need to have more. These environments need to have more value. These homes need to have more value. These communities need to have more value. And the institutions, the financial institutions that rob us of that value, that's who need to be called into question. And because the last thing I say before you get it is, just like you said, it's black people that'll be willing to do those jobs if they pay more. The problem is getting them to pay more. Putting corporations in a position to or finding ways to incentivize corporations to pay people a living wage. Federal minimum wage is still $7 freaking. So, I know you got a lot to say to that. Yeah, so I don't even think I need to ask you a question. Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess I have questions for you, actually, because I think that there are some issues with some presuppositions that you have there, and so one, and so I have three. So I guess I have three questions. One, what is your understanding of the Pareto principle as it relates to smaller amounts of people, like a small amount of people within a group being representative of, like a larger sum of whatever the activity is? So this could be like people who have wealth, and so that's not going to be spread evenly, but just like one of the principles of life, the Pareto principle seems to be the case. And I don't care if you're talking about crime, you talk about money, resources, Jews in a particular community who have wealth, Negroes in an inner city who have the most bodies, whatever it is. The Pareto principle to me seems to be a principle of life. So one, what's your sort of perspective on the Pareto principle? Two, one of the problems that I see that I think is my understanding of economics is that economics is about the idea of scarcity. And so for me, I would classify your sort of view as utopian, as you rightfully predicted, because when you talk about there being just enough resources, I guess I wonder, are there infinite many resources? I think that, like, when I think about, like, I don't know, like tomorrow, how many millions or so people are going to be born? Yeah. And in most places, births are going to outweigh deaths, which is why population continues to grow. We're going to be 8 point some odd billion, in the next few years. I think America went from like 1.7 billion, 170 million, to like 360 million in people in like 60 years. And so it's like most of the time births outweigh deaths. And so for me, what that says is that whatever amount of resources that there were, if they didn't keep up with population growth or like double or triple, like, or whatever it is, then you're going to have, and even if they did, you're going to have scarcity of resources. Any one person who gets 2 of anything has now, that you're going to have scarcity. Economics to me, and so we're talking about whatever resource, things like that this is about scarcity, and it's about how to best do with a finite amount of resources. I guess I'm wondering if you think there's infinite resources, a finite amount of resources, and if there's finite, how that sort of plays. And I guess the third topic. So first Pareto, second scarcity, and then third about this idea of abundance. And so talking about particular communities and everyone's exactly. So those are my three things that sort of, just as you're talking, I'm sort of having an issue with. But so maybe you could explain those to me in your perspective.
So first, addressing the Pareto principle in terms of like essentially having haves and have-nots, right? And in a vacuum, I think we could I think we could say like that makes sense, right? Like if just on the principle alone, we can say that it makes sense. But then when we look at when we look at the society that we exist in, then we kind of start to have to break down how things end up the way that they are. Like inequality is manufactured. It's not a thing that it just so happens that more people have, because that may be true in certain circumstances. But that again, I guess I would go far as to say that if inequality didn't have a face, if it didn't have a color, if it didn't look a particular way, right? If a people that looked one way didn't have it all, and we looked to like it was just like a group, and it for any other reason, like maybe it was like the engineers or the doctors or whatever group kind of had the most, right? Then it'll be like, okay, we can start to look at it from a more objective standpoint. But when we look at inequality in the United States and see that it has a particular color and is manufactured in a particular way, then and that's when we start to have to push back against just the principle in and of itself. And now it does become more of a subjective, personal thing, and not necessarily just an objective observation. Because it's somebody who comes from the have-nots, you feel me? It's more difficult for me to look at that the principle itself and be okay with just being the have-nots, because that's just like a possibility of how things break down.
Well, so on that note, I guess, and let me ask you, just sort of, can you think of, and listen, like I told you before the show started, one of the few people that I think
you good
to talk to. So can you think of, and I guess, and this is one of the issues that conservatives have, right? So from my perspective, inequality is a natural state of being. That is the way of nature, that things are distributed in an unequal fashion. And for us, this could be ports that you can dock in. This would be landmass. This would be height, skin color,
all of those things,
melanin level, things like that. And so for me, I wave a big red flag that says BS whenever it's sort of assumed that that equality is even a feasible sort of aim.
But I would argue that my aim is inequality.
Okay. So, but watch this though. But when we talk about the Pareto principle, it assumes that there's going to be an unequal distribution of things, and so I guess so. Let me ask you a question, and it's going to get into some of our CRT stuff later. But where can I see even a mostly equal distribution in time, in any period of history? Where can I get an example, something to aspire to, for as a way to where the Pareto principle really wasn't like where you didn't have like a minority with the majority? Where can I see that in any time, any place in history, period?
Okay, so what I would argue is that it's a question of what epistemic basis are we coming from? So when we're thinking about history, when we're looking at history, through what lens? And the reason why that lens is important is because it's like if we on YouTube, and I guess this is a part like DMG, he rock with Sinetta, this conscious community, we in here, right? Like this conscious community. So if we look at, for example, Africa, Africa wasn't a wholly egalitarian continent,
right?
There was inequality that existed. And the inequality that existed came from many different reasons. Whether you had stronger warriors, you had more, your land was better, so you yielded more resources, right? Like these are things that again, like when we talk about certain things naturally occurring, that's we see inequality, right? But it's inequality in the state of nature,
right?
When we talk about modern society, when we talk about modernity, the inequality that we deal with is manufactured wholly. Race,
think so?
I would say so, yes, and this is why. And look, no, this is why. Because you would agree, race is pseudoscientific, right? Right? Okay, race.
I would say that race is mostly pseudoscientific.
Mostly, right? Because we'll argue that there's a biological component,
right? 6% of your DNA, right? But go ahead. But
is your phenotype, right? Is what we see, right? Most of our DNA, we're not seeing in what we look at.
I got you. Yes, sir. I agree.
But what happened was when the concept of race was introduced, it wasn't introduced objectively. Let me actually frame it like this: the term race generally just applied to groups, different people. When we get to people like Carl Linnaeus and Systems of Nature, that's when we have it codified into a system, into a hierarchy. And so that's why when I say it's manufactured, that there was a social group that created a particular understanding of people based on phenotype, based on like those physical characteristics. And they said we're gonna rank those people. White at the top, black at the bottom. And because when we say hierarchy, it's not objective. A hierarchy is a ranking. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a top and a bottom to it. And so when that hierarchy gets introduced, and then the people who push that hierarchy starts shaping society in ways that is defined by that hierarchy, then that's when I would start to say, then it's not necessarily just a question of land, resources, and who's bigger, right? Because I think if, like, for example, if it was just a question of, okay, everybody on the African continent, we going to everybody on the European continent, right? Then I don't think they really would have stood that much of a chance. But once they used like what I would consider like very devious ingenuity in terms of like social structuring and the ways in which they took even a concept like slavery, which existed, right, which was already an institution, and then turned it in what they turned it into. That's where I start to push back against like the natural inequality and look at it more as this is social engineering. And yeah, so let me
ask you a question on that note. Does a rose by any other name smell as sweet?
No.
Like, so what I mean is,
it still smell like a rose. Yeah.
So I guess this goes back to my question because I guess I'm trying to figure out. Well, because what happened here, from my perspective, is that you had an unequal distribution of power, resource, and things like that came to exist, but simply by a different name. But I think that if the United States never existed, you didn't have an equal distribution in continental Africa. I don't think you had an equal distribution in the continental U.S. or in North American continent, I guess. And so I think, so this is one of the issues that I have, I guess, is and let me turn this light on because I had my window open, but it's getting dark in there. Is that a rose by any other name smells just as sweet. And so what has, and this goes back to, and so one of the things that the conservative approach has for it is that we take the law of nature and we sort of say that this is, the sort of way of being. And so what I see, if America never existed, you would have still had classes, you still would have had an unequal distribution of wealth and everything like that, but even to a greater extent. And even in places where America has not had, some of the places where there's the greatest inequality is a place where America's like, they haven't been in charge of much of anything. Like many places in the Middle East, where, and even places where like in the Gini coefficient, where there's even less inequality. These are some pretty ridiculous places to live that nobody would want to live. And so I guess for me, again, it just goes back to inequality being the state of nature. That's not an equal distribution. And so, and from a conservative sort of Christian understanding and a conservative Christian understanding, that you basically have riches, wealth, knowledge, whatever it is, whatever the particular characteristic is, whatever the thing that's most beneficial, it's not evenly distributed. And so I guess, so I challenge sort of on a fundamental basis of sort of assuming that equality or equity, whatever particular terminology we want to use there in that, depending on what who I'm talking to, that this is even remotely possible, or that this is natural. And I think that it's a largely unnatural perspective to take and to sort of think that we're going to engineer equity or equality, or to blame it on the current Western paradigm, because I see it everywhere pervasive in society.
And that's why, and that's where the clash is, because I give you that inequality is natural. I can give you that. But again, when we're talking about like understanding things from the concept of modernity, the way in which inequality is a part of the social engineering of the West, has created a different paradigm. Because, like, for example, classes were cultural, right? Like we had the internal classes that we dealt with, and how we view people within, like, intra-culturally. And then we had the way that we view outsiders, whether we viewed them favorably or whether we viewed them as opposition. And so I can give you that these labels and these things exist, but I think the problem that we run into, and I think this is the problem that most conservative thinkers run into, is that it operates from what is criticized by a lot of Black philosophers as the view from nowhere. It is the ivory tower intellectual that's speaking from the position of a narrator. And what's his name? I can't think of his name right now, the philosopher's name, but what he talks about specifically in some of the failures in white philosophy, and I say white philosophy, and I just want to be clear about this, like, this is not to say that when we speak of philosophy that it's wholly a white thing, or that any philosophers that Leondre uses or that I use myself, that, like, because they're white, what they're saying is invalid. This is a criticism. Like, what I'm saying right now is literally a criticism of the thought processes of the people because of the positionality of whiteness. It gives them, like, whiteness creates a perception, a lens of it of itself being transcendent, while the races, like Black people, are wholly factitious. Like, we are the physical. So the narrators, the people who look at the world and say, oh, inequality happens this way, and it's just like this natural thing that occurs, it's easier said from the perspective of someone who's looking down on how inequality is being manufactured. But what and this is what progressives do, or what leftists refuse to do, is distance ourselves from our circumstances to be able to understand it from that perspective. So when we talk about like inequality being natural, as someone who suffered, or as someone who can't, because I don't necessarily want to say suffers, but endured what like the harsh part of poverty, which we would argue is pretty much a product of the way that inequality has been manufactured. I can't, even if inequality is natural and we see it throughout nature, in this society, in modernity, as somebody who's operating from this kind of more this philosophical standpoint, if I bring my personal experience to it, I have to criticize the idea that because inequality is natural, that then I shouldn't be critical of how it functions and how it impacts me as a person, and we shouldn't do things to push back against it. Because then I'll say this, and I want to know what you think about the difference between equity and equality, because what I will argue is that equality from the standpoint, like, and I mostly speak from a government standpoint, equality like legally has been achieved. Like from the letter of the law, you aren't supposed to view anything that got to do with the law from a perspective of any one particular group, right? Laws impact us all. The rights that are to be protected are to be protected for all, right? So we've reached that point. What we don't have equity. And what I mean by equity is that we're not doing enough things to address the way inequality was manufactured previously, and the ways that it's still, and the way that those disadvantages still impact the way that we live today. And so it's like, so I guess that's what I'm posing to you, like, from the standpoint of establishing equity. How then does the difference in what equity means and what it means to strive for equity, how do you think that it impacts with the idea that inequality is natural? Because we could say that it's natural, but we can create circumstances that gives us tools and resources to be able to challenge them.
Okay, real quick, bros, if y'all can hear me, I'm probably enjoying this conversation a little bit more than I should, but I just want to let y'all know that we still stuck on question one, my bros.
Hold on, so, I can't. Okay, I can hear you now. Yeah, nobody, my fault.
Okay, I just want to say we still stuck on question one, and I'm definitely enjoying the conversation. If y'all want to stay where y'all at, bro, we can, man. I'm loving it, man. So y'all just let me know if y'all want to stay right here, or if y'all want to move on, or 5 or 10 more minutes. But it's up to y'all. I just want to.
Brother Domo's in charge, so whatever he say, that's the king. I yield to Brother Domo. I promise. Whatever brother say. Now listen. Check it out. Listen. I gotta be out of here in about 40-something minutes. But
okay.
Brother Domo, listen, check it, brother. Listen, the most prolific, the most scholarly, the most reasoned, the most educated brother that I've got to sit on a live discussion with like this is you. So listen, and we're definitely going to part 2 this, because I don't think we'll get through all the questions. But I'm enjoying this so much because finally, and I'm gonna say this out loud. For those of you who think I'm arrogant, I am. But I'm also able to recognize when I'm dealing with an equal and someone greater than myself. And so I'm telling you, Brother Domo is the truth. And so listen, so Brother Domo, we're going after part 2 because I got a son to pick up in football practice. But check it though. Listen, brother, listen, this is amazing. And so I'm so appreciative. Thank you for sharing the stage with me, for thinking I was even worth talking to, bro. But listen, but Brother Domo, whatever you say, if we sticking on this topic, we're gonna do it. If you
I got it, Leondre. Let's do it like this, man. We can turn this to a series. I know Domo presented 6 questions. We haven't got past 1. We can just let the first question end it on that, and we can do question 2 on the next one, and 3, you know what I'm saying, and just keep it going, bro. I think I'm enjoying this way too much myself. So,
well, actually, I think this would be a good segue for us to talk about CRT though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Domo.
Well, no. So nobody. You can go ahead and pose the question. I answered the first question first. So Leondre, you can get on the second question. So you can go ahead and get that cracking.
So
the second question is what is your stance on the critical race theory, and why do you hold that position, bro?
Yeah, so once I guess I would say that and Brother Domo will correct me if he believes I'm in error. I guess I'm moving from one of my law school textbooks, jurisprudence theory in context. Specific definition here, Leo Strauss, and several other books on political theory by Andrew Haywood. It's about 7 different books that I've had to read educationally on critical race theory. So I guess I would say that critical race theory has 3 basic components, just to sort of define what it is, and Brother Domo will respond. There's at least, I think, 3 facets. One is the prevalence of racism in nearly, if not all, facets of society. 2, one of the threads in the Crimson Cord is that you don't find concepts that are actually neutral, that they're allegedly neutral, but they work to sustain racism even if they purport to serve a minority interest. And then 3, let me see, as a matter of fact, that you need to that different particular races have different perspectives and views and different sort of experiences that you need to make room and allow for, that are not represented in sort of the sort of larger, whether scholarly or legal, whatever the particular school of thought is that you're going with, that are not represented there, that this you need to make room for. The last one is I guess is where there's more, where there's less sort of continuity. And so I view critical race theory in a very negative light, mostly for, and there's a really, really long answer, but for the sake of time, I won't get into all the points, but I guess I'll say that one of the things that with point 1, the first thing is talking about racism being sort of prevalent, and not just prevalent, but also pervasive in pretty much all facets of life. There was in some of the philosophy courses that I've had to take, where you had to deal with an analogy of the invisible gardener. And so you imagine someone said that there's a grove over there. And the reason that the flowers grow and that the trees grow and all these things happen there in that particular grove, the grass is green, the birds are chirping, is because there's a gardener who comes in every day and he feeds the birds, he waters the grass, he waters the trees, he trims those trees, he plucks flowers, he prunes them and that sort of thing like that. And you start asking for evidence that there's such a garden exists, and you set up, let's say you set up a camp somewhere, and you start viewing the garden that you're far off, and you and his partner, you have binoculars, and you view in this garden, and you're waiting for evidence of the gardener to ever show up. And they basically say, well, the gardener didn't show up because he's invisible. And then so on and so forth. You go down this list of 50,000 qualifications that are now given as to why you can never see this gardener show up over there. Critical race theory basically paints racism as the invisible gardener there, who you can't see his hand, you can't see him present, but they tell you that gardener is present, and they tell you that the evidence that he's present is because the grass is growing, and that there are flowers sprouting, and that the trees are growing, and that the birds are chirping, and the birds have not died of starvation, so on and so forth. And so rather than, and it sort of gets into some of the things I was talking about before, where as opposed to attributing unequal distribution of things to like something like the Pareto principle, just that inequality is a law of nature, and instead of looking to disparate outcomes, where certain outcomes happen because there's a difference of activity, and there's numerous examples, and I think one of the ones me and Brother Domo talked about before was things like redlining, where there are actual differences in activity between people groups. The only thing measured is the result of those particular groups. And to give an example of redlining, that Brother Domo and I didn't go into last time. So a critical race theorist would basically view the disparate outcomes, and again, because they're measuring outcomes largely, a sort of equitable position. What's the starting line look like? I'm sorry, what's the finish line look like? That the reason that there are differences between Group A and Group B are because of racism. Whereas, so myself, from a sort of classical American jurisprudential sort of background, a law and economics background, as a sort of secondary position, would say is I would wonder if they behave the same in those particular things, so we can judge a different outcome. So with taking redlining as an example, Critical race theory would basically just explain the disparate outcomes as being the result of racism. And even if they had achieved something similar, they would say, hey, even if they sought to serve a particular outcome, that that they had essentially served served whatever interest of the dominant racial class. And I would reject that view because I'm going to look at the outcomes, and so I guess I'm going to wonder, for me, on the sort of first on that level of analysis, for the redlining stat and the only reason I'm using this in Brother Domo, forgive me, is because we talked about this before. Some of the redlining studies, like one of the ones from St. Louis Fed, showed that Negroes, by and large, went for multifamily properties more than they did single home properties. Multifamily properties are far more risky for a lender. St. Louis Fed brought this out. I'm showing that they were applying for different types of loans, not just in the same amount, but different types of loans, single family versus multifamily properties. One of those has inherently more risk. And so the outcome of those is going to be a disparate outcome. You're not going to have an equal outcome of these particular issues. You're not going to have a same level of approval of applications for loans and things like that. And I'm going to attribute it to the particular actions of particular peoples or people groups by and large. And I would say that Negroes are concerned about more communal things. They want to make sure they got, they're looking at generational wealth and things like that. They're looking at make sure that they and their relatives things that have places to live and that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to attribute those sorts of things to the different level of activity and the different things that they partook in. Critical race theory is going to basically stop at the level of analysis of the disparate racial makeup of the people who applied for the loans. And so for me, I think that that's a problem. And so I don't hold critical race theory in any sort of positive light, because the question is, what's the stance of critical race theory? Why do you hold that position? And so I think that just on multiple levels, critical race theory fails. And I have an entire list of things mentally, that I could go into, but for the sake of time, I won't. But I will just say that it comes from, and I think critical race theory fails on a lot of its own axioms, because critical race theory only adheres to a certain amount of things that come from sort of Western ideology and natural law, things like rights, like inherent rights, things like that. But I think that it sort of unwittingly yields to all sorts of things. Like I would say that critical race theory is not autochthonic. The people of the critical race theory position don't hold to a chthonic legal tradition, but they sort of assume all sorts of things, natural rights being one of them, and admittedly, they think that has use for minoritized racial groups versus the exploiters and that sort of thing. And so they think those things have particular uses. But I think just like through and through, there's numerous contradictions, not even just the Invisible Gardener one, but it's like many, as far as like, how do you even explain human nature as being like inherently neutral, absent of society? And so I don't think that they have an adequate answer for how you get values of a society if each individual part of a society is neutral until society corrupts them. So and so I think that there's all sorts of logical issues, and I think there's practical issues. One of the sort of practical issues that I have, and again, this is me keeping a short, Brother Domo, hopefully we'll have a longer discussion on the second question, is as it relates to, and this is one of the big ones for me. How do I motivate people who come from my background, my community, the people I came from, who went to school next to do much of anything, if the underlying ideology that I present to them is that the system is against you, that it will never serve your interests, always serve the interests of the ruling class of whites, that the system is made to keep you down? How do I motivate those people to get up and get a job? How do I motivate them to do anything without sort of telling them that in your lifetime you'll never see anything other than a disruption? That you'll never be able to see anything in your particular lifetime, but the best you can hope for is a systemic overturning of the entire society. And so hopefully by the time your grandchildren come to be, that you can have something that resembles a neutral society that everyone can succeed equally. And so I don't know how to motivate niggas to go get up and go get a job today and to go get an education today if I'm going to simply tell them that the system is against them. It'll only ever cripple them. It'll only ever, chop them at the knees if they try. So that was long-winded, but believe when I tell you, I have probably like 100 points on this thing that I think I have an issue with. But Brother Domo, I've been long-winded. I yield to the king. Brother, go ahead.
So yeah, I consider myself a critical race theory scholar, theorist, a critical race theorist. Like Derek Bell, I look at him as he is one, like in terms of like legal writers, he like pretty much his work, Permanence of Racism and other works that he produces, like my Bible, in terms of how I approach understanding the law. And I think that Leondre, the Invisible Gardener reference is it makes sense. But here's the problem. I want to use your analogy because let me say this before we get into we get into that. I look at critical race theory as a lens. It's a lens that helps us it's a lens that helps us understand why, under what's considered an objective standard, which is the
I would
law,
agree that it's a lens, by the way, but go ahead, brother.
Yeah. Why? It's a lens that helps us kind of understand that why is this? Why do we have something that's supposed to be considered objective, like the law? Why does it produce disparate racial outcomes? And it's a level of analysis that requires us to look past the modern notions of society and race, and kind of really do more to connect the origins of racism in this country to how it operates today. And so if we the only thing I'll add to what Leondre was saying about the tenets of critical race theory is like specifically because again he was right. He said that critical race theory believes that racism is not an aberration. It's not a deviation. It is a normal fixture of society. It is anti-essentialist, which means that we don't believe in essential identities, like especially when you get into Kimberly Crenshaw's understanding of intersectionality and how like who we are is made up of different intersections of social identities. And so how did that happen? And then another one though, which is interesting to the conversation that we was having about the labor market and the immigrant communities, is understanding the ways it also helps us understand the ways in which labor markets are used and manipulated against Black people. Like the way that their labor and the way that their labor is paid is typically used as a bargaining tool or as something that is to be utilized and politicized by like the people who push a lot of the conversation about immigrants taking our jobs. And so it's like even the conversation of labor and how the labor market functions is also racialized. But the main one though is interest convergence theory, and that is the idea that anytime this government, this society does anything to the benefit of Black people as a whole, they do so only because it serves to benefit them in a particular way. And the example, and the main example that Derek Bell uses to articulate this point is Brown v. Board of Education. Because what he argues is that like before Brown v. Board of Education, they had been sued many times to end desegregation, or to desegregate, to end segregation, and to end Jim Crow. And the many suits prior to Brown v. Board of Education failed. Like mainly based on like ideas like state rights, those types of things. The uniqueness that Derek Bell argues was associated with the Brown v. Board of Education is the time period. What was going on during Brown v. Board of Education, and that we were dealing with foreign hostilities. Like what we saw like in Russia, we was dealing with a Cold War, and the United States wanted to position and posit itself as one that is for the freedom of people, while Russia's the evil communists who stomp on the rights of those people. What the United States recognized though is that it can't be a beacon for rights while at the same time saying, hey, segregation, right? Separate but equal. You feel me? Which around the world, the United States had already been criticized on how it treated its Black citizens. And so what Derek Bell argues is that Brown versus Board of Education, the desegregation of the United States, was only passed in order to give the United States a better image to the rest of the world as a weapon in the Cold War. Right? It wasn't because they actually wanted to get Black kids access to better schooling, and it wasn't because of the data that was presented during the case that talked about how there were motivation deficits and self-esteem issues that was created from segregated schools. even though that information was prevalent and was made available at that time, it was primarily because the United States could not operate under Jim Crow while at the same time claiming to be a beacon for the rest of the world. And so with that lens, I want to address the invisible gardener argument, because the thing about this garden, and let's label this garden as racism. The thing about this garden is that or racism in our society is that we saw the gardener. We know he was there. We've seen him before. He used to be very loud and very explicit. He used to tell you directly, hey, I don't like you. And I don't want you in my garden. And we knew how he operated, and we learned to function around that particular gardener. What happened though is that what the gardener recognized is that explicit, overt approach to tending this garden of societal racism actually puts his garden in danger. And if he wants his garden to survive, the people can't see him gardening explicitly. He has to garden in a way that's more that's less overt, right? And so what we're describing is if we looked at our society and it didn't have the history that we know it had, then maybe we could say that these outcomes are purely related to individual activity. But when you look at examples of different individual activity, but the same people are getting the same outcome, and you see difference in individual activity, and one particular group is getting a better outcome, then we have to question. Yeah, the farmer ain't as overt as he used to be, but damn it, I know he's still here. He's still. I'm seeing what he farmed back then. I'm seeing those same vegetables and fruits now. So we can't. There's no way that you can tell me that the farmer is gone when we saw him produce fruits. Is what we're looking at now, and even though we don't see him, them same fruits are still being produced. And so what critical race theory does is it helps us understand that we can't move through the law the same way that we would the way that we would look at it generally. Like we can look at the data that shows that, for example, white judges are more likely to give black defendants more time and heavier penalties than black judges. And it would be better if it wasn't as explicit like that and people still not be confused. But because society says no, we got rid of racism. No, that's not what it is no more. Then we end up buying into that, not interrogating like what's actually happened, the real circumstances. And so one of my favorite philosophers, George Yancey, he talks about when he what he says is the most insidious thing about whiteness is its fluidity, is its ability to look at you and say, yes, Black Lives Matter, but still produce outcomes that are detrimental to black people. Because what I would argue is that CRT agrees with the characterization that black conservatives have of the white Democrat. That's a place where there ain't gonna be no static, because we're both looking at this person that says they care about things that black people care about, but we can still see disparate outcomes as it relates to black communities and white communities. A lot of the beef that most black people have with Democrats is like, yo, you say different things, your conversation is different, but the outcome ain't really matching the conversation. You feel me? And so I think what gives critical race theory its credibility is the ability to be mainly critical of the white liberal. And that's why I distance myself from liberalism, because I can look at a white conservative just like, hey, I rock my Confederate flag. It's about heritage, not race. See, I can see all that and be like, that makes sense to me. But critical race theory has helped me understand that there is a sector of society that believes in that racial heritage like that. But then it also gives me the lens to understand that when Nancy Pelosi and them is taking a knee with Kente Clouse, that should make me uncomfortable. That should make me uncomfortable.
You better never run for office, nigga. I'm telling you that right now.
You know what I'm saying? So when we when we look at when Leondre, when you make the point about individual activity, it's still the best example to use. And like I guess the best way that I like to phrase it is like, even if you in a Benz, you still a nigga in the coupe, right? A white man driving a Lamborghini doesn't have to worry about being pulled over because he's in a Lamborghini. But that's something that black people have to worry about. And that's why. And so actually, because I got a follow-up question for you, is because I want to see from your perspective, what role do you think race plays, if any, in how our society functions?
Yes. So taking your question, was this my time to answer?
Yeah.
Okay. So by the way, so I got about 15 minutes. I got to tell you, I'll give my son. But listen, so I guess I would say that race has historically played a role, especially in the organization of society from 16th century to what I would say was about the 20th century, mid 20th century, and then since then, of the past several decades, several strides have been made to sort of rectify that. And so I would say that that race played a part. And then one of the things that I think that I would like to highlight, I think that and there's some scholars who've also done work on this area. Like there's a book that I have, I can't remember the author's name, but the book is called White Trash. And sort of, matter of fact, it's over here. Nancy Eisenberg, White Trash, 400 Untold History of Class in America. It's over here on my bookshelf. And then there's another book that I have called To Become an American, which sort of talks about just sort of the different times of racial classification. One, white is a very recent category, sort of as a whole. Certain groups are grouped in, and again, I think this is where critical race theory sort of fails, is that it sort of views certain people groups from like, continents. If you come from this particular continent, area, region, right, this particular plate, on a tectonic sort of level, that you are an exploiter versus a minority, minoritized racial group, for example. And it does the classification irrespective of particular individuals, their lives, and particular outcomes. And one of the things that you pointed to earlier, which I would say seems like it'd be a rub, which talking about whether the poor white has more in common with the poor black, or the wealthy white. And this is one of the things where I think intersectionality sort of fails, because it puts you like white, male, Christian, that sort of thing like that, and say you're an exploiter, when in reality they would have more in common, with the nigga, from the inner city, from the hood, right? And so I think one of the areas where like critical race theory and intersectionality as a tenet of critical race theory sort of fails to recognize those sort of individual differences and even sort of intergroup difference, where that group might have some. But so I would say that that for that in the beginning, in the first several centuries of what eventually became this country, whereas you had a classification of black or Negro, nigger or nigga, right?
Negre,
yeah,
Negri,
yeah,
any of those Latin cognates,
yeah. So it was one of the only like sort of existing classifications, and I think that it's one of the things that that To Become an American book is, which it was in a philosophy of language class, talking about sort of the sort of language that was used to classify a certain person as American, as sort of ideology about about becoming American. Most of the groups and stuff that we would identify as white today, and we would identify as benefactors on a critical race theory sort of lens because of the continent in which they came from, were not benefactors in things that, like the Italians, weren't considered white until the late 1960s. But today,
the Irish,
yes. So the Irish, the Scottish, the Italians, and that sort of thing like that, right? And so, in
the niggas of Europe, as they were called,
exactly. And then one of the groups we talked about before, which were the Mexicans. According to the Dillingham Commission, Mexicans were considered white, and they're considered white because historically these are largely Spaniards from Spain, and because they idea, and almost because I'm talking to somebody who knows what he's talking about, So with the Dillingham report and things like that, right? So these people who came here were considered to be white enough. So they were white in most senses, and so they were preferred to Slavic races and things like that, they're preferred to lots of other particular groups of people that we might identify as white. And so like we have a different racial category now. And it's where I think, again, critical race theory sort of fails. And this is one of the failures right here, because it fails to sort of nuance the conversation as it relates to particular people groups who, like the Mexican Americans, were far greater benefactors of North American free trade agreement and that kind of stuff, right? And sort of importing people for jobs and stuff. Whereas people from the Scandinavian countries were vultures, and these are people that today we would identify on a critical race as sort of lens. These would be white benefactors, and we would tell them that you are likewise guilty, and you're a benefactor, you're an exploiter, and things like that. And so again, I think it's a failure of the sort of critical race theory ideology. And so I think that that, like, as it related to folks who came from Central West Africa over here in that particular fashion, that it did not serve their interests during these first couple of centuries. And so I think it definitely played a huge part and stuff like that there. But I think that, that whereas conservatism would sort of view the sort of disparate activities of particular people groups and then ascribe to them merit or praise or blame based on their particular activities and what they were able to do with their outcomes, I think critical race theory is entirely too quick to lump these people together based on phenotypical expression, or sort of like a genealogical descent from some particular like continent or group, or and that kind of stuff. And so it's one of the things I think is a failure. So as a conservative, I want to view the Irish and the Scots in terms of, one, like for example, I take the Irish, and it's been worked on this by numerous scholars. Like I want to look at potato famine. I want to look at the sort of the plight of the Irish after being enslaved and conquered by the Brits, and I want to see how they were able to come to a sort of better outcome, or the sort of things that made them fail at certain particular points. And I want to see what activities, and I want to, as a conservative, say what sort of universal principles can I adopt myself as a nigga from the hood, and see if I can succeed using the particular things that made other groups succeed. And I can see those things regardless of a people group. And I think it's a failure of the sort of critical race theory schools. But go ahead, brother.
And I know you got to go soon. And so we'll like
we're gonna part two this thing.
Yeah, we got to.
Yes, sir.
Definitely.
I got about 8 minutes, but go ahead, bro. The rest of the time is yours.
Yeah, so I'll just take 5 so we can take a couple minutes to close out. Look at the time, man. Okay, cool. Yeah. So where I'll push back is on a couple different things. Like, one, the critical race theory helps us understand how the Irish and the Welsh and the Scottish and the Italians became white, because it's not that we group them in terms of whiteness, but they also receive the social benefit and the social capital of whiteness. Then the question becomes, how did they get that social capital? Well, what people from my school of thought will argue is that social capital came from how they chose to orient themselves to Black people. So yes, the Irish were lynched in America. The Italians suffered hate crimes in America, but the way they ingratiated themselves into whiteness was to then perform acts of violence on Black people. It's to adopt the relationship that whiteness has with Black people. Those other groups chose to adopt that relationship. And so that's why, again, like we can look at it from the objective world history standpoint, but if we look at it from the standpoint of Black people, like of being a Black individual and the history of Black people, we can't ignore what makes one white. And the thing that we can then understand when Derek Bell is talking about the permanence of racism is that it's one of those things where the Scottish, the Irish, and to a degree the Italians. I feel like the Italians are the biggest holdouts of maintaining a culture. But the Scottish, the Irish, the Welsh, all of them gave up that. The Germans, they are like, these people give up like that cultural and that ethnic significance to be white. Like because even when you ask people who they are, they don't tell you they German. right? You got to get like, well, my grandmother is, and I have some Swedish and all of that, but that's secondary to I'm white. I'm a white man. I check that white box. That's secondary when again I reference police because it helps us kind of understand how the law is racialized. When a cop is seeing an individual in the car, he don't care if they German, he don't care if they Italian, he don't care if they Polish, he don't care if they Swedish, they're white. In that same token, if they see when they see a black man in the car, they don't care if his ancestry is from Nigeria, East Africa, South Africa, the Congo. Doesn't matter. The label is black. And so these notions, these ethnic and cultural notions of identity become second to the racial classes in the hierarchy that we adhere ourselves to. And then the last thing I'll say is I want to push back against how you characterize critical race theory as being one that kind of conflates these identities. But what intersectionality does is it tells us that we have to recognize these different aspects of ourselves. So when I just say I'm black, I can't just say I'm black. I'm black. I come from a lower socioeconomic standpoint. I'm cisgendered. I'm heterosexual. And I know some of y'all don't really fuck with a lot of different terms. I'm a leftist, so I'm cool with them. Y'all niggas gotta recognize. You know what I mean? Hell, I'm married. There are all these aspects of my identity that make me who I am. And critical race theory focuses on highlighting that difference. And what I would argue what racism does and what race does as a whole is it functions to reduce cultural ethnic significance. Like we don't care. Just like I don't like it when we just like throw like Egyptians was black. Because what it does is it tells us that knowing that they are black is all we need to know. And we do less to understand what made them who they are because they black, right? And it's these and critical race theory helps us kind of see through the way that our society is ordered through that racial perspective. And what I would argue, and I say this, the last thing, and then I'll let you say say what you got to say to close it out. The critical race theory is a counter gaze. George Yancey, one of my favorite philosophers, talks about like the white gaze and the ways in which white society kind of dictates to us what's normal, right? So, like for example, if we look at the example of the farmer, the reason why we don't see the farmer is because the farmer is just as much of nature to us as the garden itself. So we don't speak to what's in the background. Like when there's a narrator in a movie, we're not asking ourselves, well, do the people in the movie hear the narrator? And that's how we can look at whiteness. And what critical race theory does is it gives us, specifically in the realm of law, it gives us a counter gaze that kind of that allows us to push back against the normative notions of race and identity that whiteness attempts to push.
Okay, so a couple things. So and we won't get into this. I just want to say, so the next time we come back, I want to return to this topic. It's a couple things that I'm going to want to talk to you about.
Write it down.
One, I want to talk about the sort of, and this is one of the issues that I have with intersectionality, just as a particular point of critical race theory, and really interview. I have a problem with the math of it, So I want to talk about the sort of math of it, and you're an educated Negro, so we're gonna get into the math of it. So that's one thing. The second thing I want to talk about is, and it's gonna be a big one. I'm gonna ask you a question about why do bad things happen to white people. So that's gonna be another one we're gonna talk about. I want to say that just really quickly, I do like, and this is what I would agree with you on, is I like critical race theory, and this is what I didn't mention earlier because I didn't recall. To remember to mention it, but I like understanding critical race theory as a philosophy, as a lens, or as a way of particularly gazing at the world. And I think this is important. I think it's an important point to mention that I'm going to want to talk about before in the future. I am going to want to talk more about this sort of Gardner analogy, and I like that. I like the sort of interplay between these things. So I want to touch back on that. And then again, and I'm going to ask you again when we talk in the future about the practicality of critical race theory as a lens, as a way to gaze at the world, as a way to view the world, And so in that respect, I do want to talk about why this would be acceptable to give to your people, and how you believe that this can be motivating with the particular structure that we have of society today. Does this require, on Domo's view, a sort of, I don't know, and I don't even know what to call it, because I don't want to assume that it's not chthonic, but let's say it's not chthonic. Let's say it borrows from American ideas of nation state and that sort of thing like that. But does this require some sort of quasi-black nation, like with respect to critical race theory and that sort of thing like that? What's necessary to achieving success? And so in the future, I'm going to want to talk about that, when we sort of come back. But I got to go pick my son up. But so I'm just to sort of preface it. Those are the things that I've typed out here, that I'm going to want to talk about in the future. And so hopefully when we circle back, we can talk about those issues.
For sure. I got it written down too. So I'm gonna remember. I actually wrote down, how do you motivate people with CRT? And I meant to, it was supposed to be in one of my responses, so next time we'll get into it.
Yes, sir.
Man, I just want to say that I appreciate both of y'all brothers, man. People who know me know that I love listening to intellectual conversations, and I feel like tonight both of you brothers have laid down the blueprint that should be followed by everybody who, in the communities that we call ourselves to be a part of, or the communities that we attack here on social media. Both of y'all brothers are very intellectual, as we see. Nobody yelled at anybody, nobody got cussed out, nobody got frustrated. Like, y'all genuinely had a genuine intellectual conversation, man. I appreciate both of y'all brothers. The HNIC just stepped into the building, man. What's up, brother Pianki, bro? You got something to say? Leondre got to get out of here, though.
Hey, I want everybody to take note on how narcissistic both me and Leondre is with this HNIC, and he calling himself someone really important.
Oh, so I thought he was talking about me.
Which would indicate why me and him get along despite our vastly different philosophies. And
just
and
like
I'm not,
a conservative.
and I'm not worried about your little your little joint, because I
You
told
worried about
you
none of these?
Keep it on the intellect.
Okay,
my son can beat you up. But anyway, hey, I want to apologize to y'all. I was at 801 Chop House chilling with the queen.
Nah, no apologies necessary.
Salute to my queen. Happy anniversary again. But I didn't have a signal, so I didn't even know I sent that to the wrong email, Leondre. So I apologize.
Nah, you good. You
good. From what I heard, I only heard like 30, 40 minutes or so, but it was a dope conversation from the part I heard. I do got to get y'all for that follow-up, though, because my son
got somebody up here who's aware of the things that he talks about, and that's my favorite thing. And so again, so this is, for all intents and purposes, a diss to the rest of you niggas who come here talking about stuff.
I'm on the same shit though. Like I feel the same way.
If y'all ain't doing nothing next Wednesday, look.
Hey, listen. DMZ.
They only got through two or six other questions.
Is that right? My son texted me. I seen it when I came out the restaurant. He was like, "Daddy, I don't think they're gonna get through all the talking points," because I sent him the questions too. He was like, "I don't think they're gonna get to them." But yeah, I just wanted to thank y'all for doing this, man. And like I said,
but y'all see the difference. But this is what I'm saying. I'm gonna say this before I run and give myself. And then listen, and now I'm gonna let y'all close. But listen, but this is what I mean, right? So listen, and people say I'm arrogant. I am, right? But listen, but it's an earned one, right? But this is what I mean when I say, right? So like,
why are we allowing this Native American to say Negro and nigger and words like that, and talk about critical race theory? Because for those who don't know, this is a Native American, and I don't appreciate him using certain racial jargon. So, hey, brother, I see you, and I don't appreciate it. I'm not trying to cancel you, but I may be trying to cancel you.
Okay.
So, thank y'all, man. I'm gonna tap out, but I appreciate y'all, man.
Hey, listen again. Watch this, right? But brother Domo is again. I appreciate having a conversation about it, right? So if I mention a particular topic or something, right, especially when it's something basic that the brother knows what he's talking about in a particular area. So I'm not watching a Negro Google terms online right there, right? In a discussion that he chose to talk about. So again, the brother here, like I yield to the brother. This brother here is a scholar par excellence, and again, and I can't take nothing from him, and never have and never will. But this is the difference, people, with the people who come on pretending that they know subject matter or pretending to have looked at and researched, or to know particular topics and scholars, things like that. And so again, shout out to this brother here for being formidable in that respect. And so I'm looking forward to, in ways that I've never looked forward to, discussing anything with anybody else outside of Byron, being on opposite ends as a person. I look forward to another discussion with this brother here, because we can actually do this. And so again, so thank you, Brother Domo, the political plug. Follow his page, subscribe to whatever, because this is brother, again, who is somebody who I respect. So thank you.
See, y'all
Appreciate it, bro.
As you keep saying, y'all know I get down in the gutter with y'all, man. I'm one of y'all, but I got people like my bro Leondre and Byron Washington and those good brothers in what I call the one, for this very reason, man. They can talk to the best of the highest of the highs, man. And again, bro, I appreciate y'all for coming on Paradigm Shift, man. I ain't gonna hold y'all too much longer. Do any one of y'all got something to say?
Let me say this.
I yield to Brother Domo. He got the last word.
Yeah, and I know you got to run too, so I'll tap in with you, Leondre. But I want to point to when Leondre talking about, like, when people bring up being arrogant and all of that type of shit. Again, you got to respect where niggas get it, like, really actually earn to talk the way that we talk. You feel me?
That's right.
Like, because to be honest, him and I, like, we literally just disagreed this whole shit. All of this,
and nobody probably didn't catch it.
You know what I'm saying? We wasn't sitting here like, no, I agree with you. I mean, it was certain things where we kind of, like, you know what I'm saying, kind of understood things on. But for the most part, all of this was full disagreement. I fuck with CRT. Leondre does not. You know what I'm saying? So what y'all saw was, I didn't. His ego and my ego never came up, because we never felt challenged. Nobody, there was, I won't say never felt challenged. It was like, the challenge was, like he said, formidable. The challenge was respectful. You feel me? Like, this is, I'm not intimidated by the words he used. He's not intimidated by the words I use. You feel me? We're not intimidated by the concepts. So even though we wholly disagree, we on two opposite sides of the spectrum, we kept it about the concepts. We kept it about what we was talking about. You feel me? And that's because we have a wealth of information that allows us to tap into the knowledge instead of turning it into personal attacks, instead of turning it into ego tripping and pissing contests. You feel me? And so recognize, like, the niggas that get called the arrogant the most, the niggas that, you feel me? This is how we engage with each other, because it's respect. So if niggas like and like niggas like weak ass Sabio, like, you know what I'm saying, like weak ass Cedric, like them, like soft ass niggas like that, you feel me? That like they play intellectual. You know what I'm saying? They play like they smart. You feel me? But you can see, based on the way that they respond to niggas, that they can't move like this. So
right.
I appreciate the opportunity, because as much as Leondre be talking about, you know what I mean, with respect for me, I'm telling you, I've read a lot, and I know he's read more than I have. And I've read a lot. A lot. Like, the brother be said that when the brother mentioned books that I haven't heard of, I'm writing them all down. Like, that's just how it works. You feel me? So like that book, would you say it was Becoming American? Or
yeah. Watch this.
Again, if we can reiterate it again, this is how two intellects have a conversation. And they was disagreeing the whole time. I think so also, Domo. One of the reasons being as well, right? When a person is well studied, you already know the arguments. So now all you're doing is just giving which side of the argument you're on. And when y'all and other people talk to some of these people who are really not worthy, and I like what Byron said, sometimes people gotta earn the right to even have an opinion. Just because we have YouTube and everybody got a phone and you can press record and go live, honestly, that don't mean that you should have a voice. But y'all say y'all hate America and hate this and that, but you should love America enough to know that you got freedom of speech. You can say what you want to. You can be as dumb as you want to and still come out here and act like they can talk on the level as y'all brothers, man. But Leondre, we can't hold y'all. I can't hold you too long, my brother. So y'all want me to close out? All right. I just want to say, man, that has been Leondre, the Slim Reaper. That has been Domo, the political plug. I am nobody. Always trying to tell everybody about somebody who can save anybody, and that is Jesus the Christ. This is Paradigm Shift TV 314, where the truth lives. We'll catch y'all in the next one, and that's peace.
Fucking conservative. It ain't a conservative conversation if a nigga don't pull a gun out.
But